Hello, my name is Marissa Yaker. I'm a managing attorney with Paget Law Group. Thank you for joining this pan-different session where I am joined by Alan C. Myers, Assistant General Counsel, VP Home Lending, JP Morgan Chase Bank, Anthony Forsberg, Senior Vice President, Mortgage Servicing Division, The Money Source, John Dunnery, Vice President, Government Loan Servicing with Community Loan Servicing LLC. Today we're going to be discussing Reg X Pulse Check. Servicers discuss the final rule implementation. Let's begin with our first question today. Ensuring compliance with Regulation X. Let's discuss how you tackled it and the prep for file movement. John, do you want to go first?
Sure, Marissa, thank you. Glad to be here with the other panelists as well. The implementation was, I would say, a multi-pronged effort at Community. We involved a lot of the different business units and business leaders in order to both understand what the regulation was stating, what the restrictions were, how we were going to proceed with implementation, and then obviously updating any of our documentation, which we think is very important, as we expect to have that documentation reviewed by many regulators after the fact when they come in and review the processes that were done. Initially, obviously, we're dealing mostly with where the customer is from a standpoint of their forbearance and exiting forbearance. Obviously, most of the loans that we service will have a forbearance end date around the end of this month. So we expect a significant spike of loans to come out of forbearance. We've already had loans rolling off of forbearance between April and today's date. I would say that that has spiked consistently with the data that has been put out by the industry from a standpoint of a max amount of loans in forbearance around March of this year, and that has rolled off consistently month over month. Several of our portfolios have more in forbearance than others. I would say that our FHA portfolio, for example, is consistent with the industry, that it has a higher rate of individuals still in forbearance. And also our private placement loans also have a higher rate of forbearance as well. The GSE loans have rolled off consistently with the data that we've seen so far. As we approach the customer and where they are right now, it's really an outreach issue first. We haven't seen any of the spikes in call volume that some of the other industry data there. It's been very consistent over the last 3 months. We expect that to change though as we enter October. So we have staffed up significantly for the end of month and beginning of month October call volumes. So as we have individuals coming off forbearance, we expect them to have a lot of questions, and we obviously want to have people on the phone to answer them for them. We've also done a lot of work in building out self-help on our website, for example, and I know several of industry partners as well have done that. Self-help is going to be a crucial thing for customers coming off for several reasons. One, it's the customer preferred option for a lot of our borrowers. They prefer to do it on their own or get information on their own rather than having the constant phone calls or the phone call discussions. So I think it will allow them to use that technology in order to help them get to a certain point and maybe then come into a actual workout with an individual on our staff as they get later in the process. We expect, again, to have a significant number of those customers come off forbearance into a workout option, which will alleviate, right, the number of loans that really are impacted by the regulation. Those customers, though, that are still struggling, obviously we want to reach out to them, but also now we have to look at the fact that we have to start some timelines. Obviously, the customers who were delinquent prior to March of 2020, that's our first look from a standpoint of contacting those customers, but also resuming those timelines if they were in foreclosure before March of 2020, and we now need to resume that foreclosure timeline. Or if they're delinquent now, have not proceeded into a workout option, and we are trying to get that timeline started. So all of those things will have to go through all of the security checklists that we've created in order to make sure that the regulation issues have been addressed and that we're not starting that foreclosure too early. but also that we have given that customer all opportunity to work out that loan before we actually go down that path. And then we have the customers who are, again, sticky. I think most of us here on the call have been in the industry long enough to know that somewhere between 8 and 18% of our customers never either actually get in touch with us, right? And those are the ones that are the most difficult. They are customers who were both delinquent before and have now newly become delinquent and are probably have a lot of anxiety around what to happen. Even with all the information we have out there, they're still anxious about what to do. So contacting those customers is forthright what we want to do, but we also need to obviously move across the timeline on those as well. And at Community, we're going to try to delay that as long into this year as possible in order to give those customers all the opportunity to get a loss limit option and get contacted for a loss limit option. And we're likely going to really look at those loans from a Reg X perspective towards the end of the year and then into next year. That's basically what we've done so far to prepare. And obviously, we're looking to see this trend up between now and the end of the year, but primarily be a concern in the first quarter of next year.
Thank you, John. And Alan?
Yes, I wanted to touch on a couple of the things John was discussing. First of all, to the extent you can have a digital platform for customers to communicate, or even failing that IVR, just from an internal resource perspective and from a clarity perspective, if the customer goes into a portal and clicks an option, that is, it's so much easier to feed into the system than customer, talking to an agent. And some customers are going to want that, but customers are human, our agents are human. They don't always speak as clearly as we would like them to. So that is certainly something we have leveraged since the start of the pandemic. As soon as we were able to build platforms, they've been a tremendous boost. I will focus a little more on the foreclosure pieces. And I remember going back to, I think it was late April, early May, when we first started hearing about this moratorium that was going to go beyond even the GSE and Govy regulations that we were used to, and was going to apply to all loans. And we saw the first round and, sought to push for some more exceptions. I think the 120 days delinquent at the start of the emergency period was a really crucial one. I know that was even advocated for by the bankruptcy trustee community, who said, the longer you wait, the customers who go for a long time without sometimes that extra impetus to engage, that is not necessarily helping the customers. I mean, as John was saying, there are a lot of customers who, are hesitant to engage, and there's a lot of information out there. Sometimes I wonder if there's almost too much information out there, and things have been changing so quickly that customers are, I mean, if it's perplexing to those of us in the industry sometimes, imagine how the customers must feel. So where we are at today, obviously leveraging the 120 delinquents at onset of the emergency period, the vacant and abandoned property safeguard has been, really more challenging, as we were discussing before the panel. Now, with the definition tied to state and municipal law, I mean, that is very difficult to matrix out. And, we have dialogue. We've surveyed our firms and, to identify places that have defined it at the state level and at the larger municipal level. And we're really going through on a case-by-case basis to see, where do we have, the photographic evidence from our inspectors to justify the fact that we really think it is vacant. Where do we have what we need in our call notes? So that is obviously part of the waterfall. Then in terms of unresponsive customers, I know that's something we've really struggled with for a number of reasons. Number one, you got to make sure you're capturing every communication channel you have. Number two, they could be unresponsive and you can refer it to foreclosure, and then they respond, and then you're starting all over again. Number three, it seems like you have kind of a 10 to 45 day window within which you send the required letter, and you've got to get your foreclosure filed within that window. So it's extremely challenging operationally. The prior Reg X decision safeguard is a little more straightforward, but it's still not exactly clear as to whether it necessarily applies to at any point in history or only after the pandemic started, which is know how a lot of in the industry are looking at it. And so, and I actually have been talking to our sub-servicers in the industry, and I don't know that there's one uniform approach that we're all going to take. A lot of it's going to depend on your portfolio, some on your risk preferences, probably some on your regulators, but it's been a wild ride, and I'm just hoping it's over from at least a top-down perspective so we can focus on executing on what we have.
Thanks, Alan. And you do have a January 1st sunset date, right? As it relates, at least as of today's date, in regards to the safeguards. And I think the vacant and abandoned discussion is very important too, in reference to it, because the scope of Reg X, right, under 12 CFR 1024.30 states that it only applies to the primary residence of the borrower. And then as it relates to the unresponsive borrower and sending those early default intervention notices, making sure that you're strictly within that window of the 10 days and the 45 days, because then if you're not, then you're not in compliance, right? And also making sure that you're still following any exclusions with under 12 CFR 1024.39 if the borrower has disputed FDCPA, and only sending that notice once within the 180-day period and so forth. So great points. And Anthony?
Yeah, I love how Alan and John both touched first and primarily on the ability for everybody and the customers to have access easily and digitally to be able to look at loss mitigation. That's definitely one thing we did early on as well. And we saw about 30 to 40% of our customers actually use that route opposed to calling us, which is not only nice from a call center perspective, right? You're not having high ASA times, you're not having a high abandonment rate. So that definitely helped from that area, as well as not having to increase staff very quickly and do a lot of training. So we're able to keep and maintain the same staff, do the training, and it really helped out from a loss mitigation perspective. Like Alan, I want to touch more on the foreclosure side, because I think that's really where the crux of a lot of gray area could still be. I think we are pretty solid on the loss mitigation side. It's a lot of contact, a lot of letters, getting the customers in, getting decisions quickly so we keep customers engaged. But like others, we took the waterfall approach to our foreclosure referral review. And we definitely looked at the 3/1/2020 population first. But one of the key things I want to point out is making sure that they're 121 days delinquent as just 120 days delinquent, right? Because I know that kind of came a little bit later when we were looking at, hey, we can refer on X date. No, it's actually 1031 or before from that 121 population. So that was one of our first items that we definitely took and looked at. And then one of the other things that we definitely looked at too more recently was if a customer was delinquent at that point in time, but they cured their delinquency after 3/1/2020 via reinstatement, via a loan mod, and then they became delinquent again to be in our 120 population, we actually took the stance of that's a new delinquency. So we're not looking at that safeguard for that population. So they're now falling into a different bucket, whether it be vacant and abandoned, responsive or non-responsive customers. So one thing I wanted to point out there. Next in line, like everybody else, we looked at the vacant and abandoned property, and we took, I'd say we're conservative and yet not conservative at the same time. We definitely looked into it being a primary residence. So we looked at certain things as like, is it a second home already at origination? Have we talked to them about loss mitigation? In the RMA, have they said that it was a second home or anything like that that would indicate it's not a primary residence? So we looked at that. We also did build out a matrix, Alan, and you said it is very difficult. It's not easy, but we did what we could on a matrix. And one of the things we looked at is ensuring that if it is vacant, that we've actually secured it. So it's met other requirements of, maybe having no utilities on, or some of the other things that we look at from a property preservation perspective. And we are moving forward on those secondarily in our waterfall. But there are a lot of things that we are capturing to not move forward. So I would say, we're at looking at those, probably about referring 20% of those overall. So next in the waterfall, we look at the responsive borrowers. So we're taking a lot of data, and we're taking a big data approach, whether customers have sent us emails in, right, for being responsive. Have the customers written to us? Do we have QWRs? Do we have any other type of complaints from outside regulations, right? We've looked at things as if we have a property inspector going out to the property and they talk to that property inspector, right? Is it via communication via your vendor? And we are taking a very conservative approach on that. One of the other things that we do, we're a big PLS mortgage servicer. So we have a lot of customers that can go into branches and make a payment, right? Or go into and not make a payment. Or do we have customers who are doing outbound phone calls to try and get customers to refinance, even if they are delinquent? All of those things are actually, we are deeming them to be responses by the customer. So one of the things we're doing in our referral checklist is if we get through everything on our side that says, yeah, no responses here, we're actually sending an attestation to some of our clients saying, can you attest that you have not had, customer contact within X amount of time as well, right? So that we're trying to reach out as far and wide as we can to make sure that we are doing the right thing. So that's been a challenge, getting those types of things done. But I think we're showing the due diligence to be able to move forward when it's time to move forward, right? And ultimately, really what we're doing is all of the reviews and all of the logic, and we've created a series of questions within those reviews and with the logic, so that at the end of the day, if you type a yes, this happened, a no, this happened, right? It's going to give automated responses and consistent responses to the reviewers who are doing the foreclosure referrals. So it says, yes, you can move forward because of this regulation or because of this safeguard. And then when we're sending the stuff up to our firms so that they can move forward, we're letting them know why we're moving forward, what safeguard it fell under and why, right? So that we can be both on the same page. So I think that's really, really good, right? It's just making sure that we're on the same page and getting our firms involved to make sure that they have the same information that we have. So if anything comes up, we can be talking the same story.
Perfect. Thank you, Anthony. And as a law firm too, right, we had to make sure that we wanted to ensure compliance with Reg X too, because with our clients, we're a team. So anytime we get referrals too, we actually have a checklist before first legal can be met that has to be completed by an attorney, where it literally goes through the waterfall, just like everyone was discussing here, but they have to go and say, okay, is it this? No. If it's this, no. And making sure, and then if we don't have that documentation or we don't see the reason why we are able to proceed, reaching out, waiting, not proceeding, making sure that we have the notice if it is the unresponsive borrower within that time frame, and ensuring compliance because we're a team and everybody wants to comply with Reg X. So great discussion. Now let's go on to, and John touched on it a little bit, forbearance exits. What is the biggest hurdle you're anticipating as borrowers exit forbearances over the next 12 months? Now, based on some of the recent data from the Black Knight Mortgage report, it was showing that a huge population of borrowers are actually exiting these forbearances this month. So really curious to see what everybody has to say. Alan?
Yes. The volumes, I think, are going to be challenging in and of themselves. I mean, I will say that if the customers were current or close to current at the time of the emergency period and they're engaged, it should be relatively straightforward, at least for most investors. You do a deferral or, slightly trickier extension. It's a little trickier with the gubbies, but still those will be a challenge based on volume and, based on some shifts in guidance from investors and insurers. But the buckets that I'm worried about, it's less that population than the customers who are too delinquent to qualify for a deferral or extension. Yes, you can. Everybody should reach out and attempt to engage them in law submit. They may even be streamline eligible, which makes things a little simpler. As long as you have confidence that the streamline option is the best option. That gets into a whole other consideration that you just don't have if they pick the deferral. And I mean, I think also given all the not just communications in our industry, but in the news media generally, I think in congressional hearings even, there's sort of an expectation that you will be able to reach some sort of curing solution at the end of your forbearance. And for some customers, that's just not going to be the case. So that is the first bucket that I'm probably most concerned about. I mean, the second, which we've talked about a fair amount, customers who just just don't engage. And you sort of know the path they'll ultimately go down if they don't engage. It's just, you keep wondering, what is it really going to take to engage? I mean, for some customers, it's a breach letter. For some, it's initiation of foreclosure. But if there are other ways to get through, particularly if you can accommodate customer preferences, are they more responsive to, are they just not responding to the letters because they don't open their mail? Should we be reaching out to them, another way, of course, ensuring you're complying with all the applicable laws for whatever method you use. But so that's the second bucket, the silent customers. The third bucket, it's fairly small now. I anticipate it'll be getting a bit larger in the future, is customers who filed bankruptcy. And, there's a whole set of things, as the Appropriations Act in December created this CARES Act forbearance, which it's not legally required that you file it when the customer ends it, but the Chapter 13 trustee community seems to be expecting, if you're not going to file that, you're going to be filing something at least that is transparent, and you're not going to be trying to push these customers out of bankruptcy through a motion for relief the moment their forbearance ends. So, we'll file our CARES Act supplemental proof of claim. It'll have the forbearance amounts. It'll have any additional delinquent amounts. Then the customer will have some time to amend their plan, or the trustee can amend the plan, or even the servicer can amend the plan, though I don't think many people, anyone in the industry really wants to be in that business. So that is one where I'm anticipating a few more, the third bucket where I'm anticipating a few more bumps along, what's already probably not going to be the smoothest road to begin with.
Thank you, Alan. Anthony, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree that everybody's going to be really focusing on volume, and these next couple of months are high volume overall. When you look at high volume, it's not, it gets spread out through an organization. You have obviously the call center, who has increased volumes, and we touched earlier on trying to make sure that we can direct customers through digital experiences, right, which helps us out overall. But regardless of which way the customer goes, and if they're engaged, it ends up going to your loss mitigation group. So your loss mitigation group then has to run them through their waterfalls. You have to validate that, if there's any documentation, you have all the documentation, prepare the modifications, get that out. Some of us have vendors that we use. Some of us use the same vendors, right? So is your next hiccup going to be where we're all overloading our vendors quickly to get mod docs out, right? And are we using some of those vendors to hand deliver? Are we using some of those vendors to assist with notaries, right? Mobile notaries out there to get customers. So I think those are all the things and some of the struggles we look at to make sure that our vendors, even ourselves, are prepped for volume dips and spikes. And I think that's definitely something we all got to look at. And then from there, you also have the non-responsive customers like Alan was talking about, and it's a different approach, right? So you're constantly trying to do outbound calls to them to make sure that we're getting something. We are emailing them if we can. We are sending them text message if they've opted in. We're alerting them on the web saying your forbearance is ending at X amount of time. Do something. Let's take action. And then prior to that, we're sending out letters, 30 days prior to the forbearance ending, letting them know, all of these things are occurring. And, you're just doing your best to try and get those responses. And then it falls down to your next steps. If those customers don't do anything, what do you do from a incomplete application, right? So some of the things that we're doing now, and customers who are either falling out of trial plans for streamline mods, or not returning docs, or falling out of forbearance, right? We're treating these all as incomplete applications. So then you have to follow up with, we're doing 3 calls within 30 days, plus sending out an MAA package and emailing them where we can as well. So I think all of these things in conjunction just has the organizations doing a lot of pounding to the customers to get a response. We want to get a response, right? And that's really, it makes everybody happy. Not only makes the servicers happy, but it makes the investors happy, right? Because everybody's getting some cash flow at that point in time. So I think just ensuring that, we are getting in contact with the customers, because you want to get engaged, and the quicker you can get a customer engaged, the faster they will get the documents back to you, and then it brings them current.
So what I'm hearing so far is communication, either be electronically or written. John?
Yeah, Marissa, I think one of the interesting things to me is if some of the recent data that we're seeing is going to follow through in the last quarter of this year and the first quarter of next year, where we have seen the already spike in and peak in the what I'll call the simple options, right? The customers coming out and getting into the deferral or some type of extension, and that the customers that are left, the 1.4, 1.8 million, whatever number you want to pick from the industry data, right? Those are the customers that are not going to be able to use one of those simple options in order to cure the delinquency that built up either during the pandemic itself or delinquency that they had pre-pandemic and then just accelerated right during the pandemic by not making future payments. So I think that's the key thing. I think Anthony popped out that as well, which is those customers are going to need a lot more individualized care in order to work through the process. We're going to have to get more information from them so the streamlined processes don't work where we have a data-driven process on our side and we can just look at a few data points and see if we can send out a streamline. You know, the fear is, in looking at our portfolio, for example, is that we're going to have a decreasing uptick in that, right? And we're going to have to work through a whole full package with a customer or a partially documented package with a customer. That's a lot more hands-on, a lot more communication back and forth with the customer. It requires them maintaining that contact with the customer, which can get difficult if it stretches out for 30 days or more. The customer goes away for a period of time or is not responsive, or as Anthony puts out, right, we get incomplete packages, so we don't have the information we need to work with, right? And then you get into the denial process, right? So you have the old CFPB rules with the new rules saying, okay, how do I deny this customer now? Is it a soft denial? Is it a hard denial? Do I soft denial them and then go put through them the foreclosure checklist to see if I should start foreclosure? So it's a lot of operational headache. And as Alan said, hopefully we're done with the top-down changes now and we can actually execute on those things, because I think the great majority of the remaining customers are going to require that kind of more enhanced activity by the servicer in order to work those out. And what we don't want to see, obviously, right, is those customers flow into foreclosure. So the efforts that both Alan and Anthony talked about in getting engagement are important. I know that we're looking at one of the old financial crisis things. We're actually scheduling live on-site events in which people can come into a location, right? Again, we have to worry about that with the Delta variant that's out and other things, but still, I think it's another approach that we can do, particularly in high concentration areas where we have delinquency, that we can schedule something that hopefully customers might come into a place, right, and work directly with one of our loss-mint representatives in order to start something. The mailings, of course, we know what that does, right? It's hit and miss all the time. Alan mentioned the breach letter, right? So that's usually one of the good things, right? So having the breach letter sent out starts a conversation with the customer on a significant number versus the letters that we send out. You know, we've used flyers before, I'm sure Anthony and Alan have as well, right? And try to get the customer, you know, in different colors, and envelope packages, something to get their attention. But it seems interesting that sticky 8 to 18% always give us problems. And of course, those are the ones that are going to hit the news wire. Those are the ones where the regulator is going to come in and say, what did you do for this customer, right? And although we know from experience, right, how to deal with those customers, unless they engage with us, we really can't move forward and help them. And that's going to be the biggest hurdle I think we need to overcome over the next 2 to 3 months, is how do we get engagement at a high enough level that we can demonstrate that we can use the workout tools that have been given to us, provide those to the customer and get the best workout option. You know, I know HUD tried, right, to do a streamline with the ALM. I'm sure Anthony and Alan have the same thing. They've done a review of their portfolios if they have FHA loans, and it helps 2% of their customer base, right? It's not enough. And we do need additional tools, right, that will help us be able to drop offers to a customer, because you can get a fairly large uptake if you actually send them something in which they can look at it and say, the first thing they see is an affordable payment. Boom, they're already interested. You might get that document signed and sent back, and then you can actually start working with that customer. So I think hopefully that will be something that we can deal with over time. And potentially improve the uptake with regard to the customers who we're going to have trouble getting engagement with.
Thank you, John. And I know that there's a lot of different campaigns going on too, trying to further outreach the Not Okay, It's Okay program, right? And then the Bureau also has a full page along with informational videos and so forth of what the options are for the bars and so forth. So I know engagement is very key right now, making sure that people are getting the help that they need. Moving on to our next question, now that we've discussed forbearance hurdles, let's just go in general. What operationally is the primary hurdle today? Anthony?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think everybody's operation runs a little bit differently. So everyone's going to have different hurdles. But for us, I think the biggest challenge that we've seen is the regulations for loss mitigation and default. We are a heavy GSC and GDMA portfolio. That's primarily what we do. So, when we get all of these updates that are coming out from USDA, from VA, from FHA every 3 months, and it seems like it's been every 3 months for the most part, keeping up with that operationally, from a technology perspective, as well as, keeping those things good from training as well, I think has been really a challenge, right? We're obviously, we get through it, but it is a challenge. And one of the things that we want to make sure that we're doing with these challenges is effective documentation, because at any point in time, we all know we're going to have regulators down, knocking on our door saying, all right, provide me when, what you're doing, when you're doing it, why you're doing it, and how you're doing it. So I think a lot of different version controls around when we've done something, when we've implemented something is key for us, right? So that at any point in time, we can say, we did this, and this is why we did it. So I think those types of things, just for loss mitigation, have been, pretty difficult overall. And then I think one of the other items that we've seen is the regulations for foreclosures and some of the ambiguity with starting foreclosures. I think we're starting to get to our groove now with these things as we're all having these conversations. But I think early on, every 30 days it seems like, were we going to start foreclosure? Were we not going to start foreclosure? Am I staffed right? Am I not staffed right? Am I moving people back into the loss mitigation group to help out with some of the volume, and then move them back into the foreclosure group because we are going to start now? So we definitely did a lot of that. We moved people around because we didn't want to have to do any types of layoffs when volumes were up in one group, volumes were down in another group. So we did a lot of shifting and a lot of training, which I think is going to help long term when you have teams in foreclosure really actually get a better understanding of what happens in loss mitigation. So when they're reviewing their files, either for a referral or prior to going to first legal, yes, the customer is engaged and we're not going to move forward. We're not dual tracking. So I think that's really helped us out, but it's also been a challenge at the same time, right? And then I think one of the other things is looking at the continued extension for FHA for first legals, right? What's the best approach on that? That's definitely been something that we're trying to track. Do we submit a certain code? No, we just found out this week, okay, we're not going to go ahead and submit certain codes for these things. We're going to wait until we approach that 180 days for first legal, and then you get an extension. Are we actually going to get those extensions approved though? I've heard yes, I've heard no. So I think operationally, just going through some of these things and just some of the unknowns, I'd say some of the unknowns still is really the biggest operational challenge we have, because it's hard to predict what's going to happen. It's hard to plan for something that could change at any point in time. And it's more difficult as you get closer to some of these things, and you still have some gray area. Obviously, we always work through it and we make the best decisions for ourselves and our customers. But I think that's some of our operational hurdles that I've seen from our group.
So I would agree with you from law firm operational side as well in reference to staffing, right? So with some of the agency moratoriums, we didn't know at some points whether or not they were going to expire or be extended. And we know now, as of today's date, all the agency moratoria expired on July 31st, minus for evictions through the end of this month for the agencies. And so as a law firm too, we were looking at staffing, and internally, we didn't want to do layoffs either. We wanted to keep our staff. Our staff is like a family to the firm. And so making sure that we took this opportunity to cross-train individuals, have them learn different states if applicable, and making sure that we took this time to further strengthen our tools and refine certain processes internally and so forth. So I would agree with you. It's been for lack of a better term, a roller coaster, but the pandemic has been very fluid, and I think that we all have the same goal, is to make sure that the files that should be moving are moving, and the files that should not be moving are not moving, and that the bars are getting the help that they truly do need. John?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, Marissa, I can identify three things that are challenges that going into this period of time of the wind down of the COVID pandemic. One is the increased activity by our GSE and HUD partners in the non-COVID space, right? So both Fannie and Freddie are introducing differences in their invoice management and expense payment at the same time that we're dealing with customers coming out of COVID and forbearance, right? And trying to manage that. HUD is moving into Catalyst. Anthony mentioned SFDMS reporting. Okay, was this the right time to really introduce a change SFDMS reporting? I'm not sure, right? So we're trying to manage that as well, because that is significantly impactful to an FHA servicer, making sure that we report correctly, because it impacts our reimbursement, it impacts our peer scoring. It has a lot of impacts, and I'm trying to bring that in-house and trying to get the staff trained up on that at the same time that we're addressing all of the COVID responses as well has been difficult. Now, I applaud them for the changes that they're making. The timing might be a little bit interesting, but certainly each of the GSE and agency partners have done a lot over the last month in order to introduce things that over time I think will be very beneficial to the servicing investor relationship. But the timing seems to be a little bit off right now with regard to focus, asking services to do a lot with a small amount of time in order to get those things done. The other thing I think is the political climate in the states, right? That is causing a huge problem from an operational perspective. As the federal government addresses certain things, if a political climate in state A versus state B has a different view on what they want to do to protect their citizens, now we're involved with that as well. So New York changes something, Massachusetts changes something, Illinois does, California does, right? All these things they want to step in, right, and do different things with regard to managing a foreclosure moratorium or the evictions, or can you even proceed with foreclosure in their state, right? What you need to do there. You mentioned the Reg X letters to the customer and what kind of relief they might have. Well, the states are doing certain things as well. Are they putting a step in for mediation? Are they putting a step in that says that you need to have an actual affirmative response from the servicer or the note holder, right? That they've done all these things in order to move forward with foreclosure. All those things are difficult. You and your lawyer partners, right, are going to have to deal with that each state to make sure that that gets done correctly for us, because we can't possibly manage that at a servicer level or a loan level, right? So those things are hard as well. And then this is all happening at the same time where services are looking at whether or not bringing their staff back into the office or leaving them at home, right? And we have all of this training, all of the oversight, all of the controls we need in place for an environment in which we may be making decisions now to bring staff back into the office, and how disruptive that might be to our implementation execution. Some of the things that are necessary, not just on the Regulation X, but also all of the different changes that are coming in place. More importantly, right, not disrupting our ability to stay in contact with the customer. I think that'll be important. So those two things I know are front of mind at community, and I'm sure they're impacting all the other servicing partners as well.
Thanks, John. And I think you brought up some valid points, right? There are a lot of things that are going into effect during this time, right? You have FHA did delay the implementation date to certain changes, right, until March 2022. Reg F, only 17 comments were received by the Bureau in reference to postponing the effective date for the FDCPA amendments to go into effect. And most of those comments said, no, don't postpone. And so that effective date will be going into effect November 30th, 2021. And I mean, that's a 1970s regulation that was amended to fit today's time. So there's a lot of technology enhancements in that as well for servicers. So servicers are definitely busy right now. Alan?
Yeah, Marissa, I have to say I focused on the last word of your question, today, and the primary operational hurdle today is probably, if I think of today as the date this is going to be broadcast, I know that's the date that the eviction moratorium ends, and everyone who's been waiting well, I mean, not for everyone, but for the bulk of many of our portfolios. And so that means everyone is going to be, running to court trying to initiate eviction proceedings. It's going to put a huge burden on firms who, we know have had just not had enough volume, which, even firms like yours who've done the right thing by their people. It's still, I'm worried about people shaking off the rust, both our internal processing and our external processing, and bringing new people in, to the extent it hasn't been the same folks around. So that's today, but you get into another day I'm thinking about is whenever everyone gets back from New Year's, this huge rush. I think particularly for FHA files, if there's any gray area as to whether they meet a safeguard, everyone's going to want to try to get it in under that January 27th date. I think it is. That's the 180 from the last moratorium extension, just to avoid any potential issues as to whether or not you get the additional 90 from the federal auto extension, or whether you're doing manual extensions. And then, you mentioned March, we have some new FHA handbooks taking effect. So, I think it's going to vary a good bit from day to day. I'm hopeful that, Loss Mit, which I think has been the most operationally strained group within Chase's default so far, maybe getting, I don't even want to say getting out of the woods because I'll just jinx us, but at this point, given that we haven't had moratorium extensions, but I mean, yeah, you haven't had the GSCs extend their moratoriums or FHA, but that's because you have the CFPB moratorium. Are they really done at the top of the administration? I would like to think they have to be, but it's having been in a moratorium for 18 months now, I kind of get the feeling I'll believe the end of it when I see it. So those are my thoughts.
And I think that's a valid call out, right? Because the pandemic has been so fluid. We don't know if January 1st is going to be the sunset date, at least as of today, right? But we can focus on today, like you were saying, Ellen, we take it day by day. And just looking at it, and you touched on evictions, and so we know that the administration has made it very big in reference to making sure that renters are getting the assistance they need and so forth. And they just had a roundtable, I think, like 2 weeks ago, and it was very interesting. It's a YouTube if anybody wants to watch it. But making sure that tenants are able to access their emergency rental assistance funds that are available and so forth. And the Bureau has a link, and you can click on the emergency rental assistance finder, and trying to make it less paperwork than it previously was, because that's kind of been the theme, right? Making sure that there isn't a lot of paperwork for borrowers or renters for that matter, because that was one of the lessons that was learned from the prior housing crisis, is that borrowers were inundated with all this paperwork that had to be completed, and they weren't able to get the help they need. And so that's kind of where interim rule Reg X came into effect, right, last July. And now with the tenants for the emergency rental assistance, making sure that there is less paperwork for these people to potentially receive these funds either through the homeowner assistance fund or through the emergency rental assistance fund. So we're going to move on to our next question. And we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but how do you approach file scrubbing and look backs? John?
Yeah, so the interesting thing there is we've obviously put a process against that, as I'm sure my other partners have as well. The problem with the look back is we're actually trying to ascertain what files are going to move forward fastest or first, and trying to get those done in some systematic order. The scrubbing part, though, is something that we have at least some experience with because of the length of time that we had from the last financial meltdown, where states took a sufficiently long period of time in order to get their state processes moving. And we had loans sitting stagnant for periods of time, similar to them sitting stagnant during the forbearance and moratorium periods. So what we have there, we have at least a playbook that we can use from a standpoint of knowing that, when was the last time we had a property value done on this? When was the last time we actually had communication with counsel, either inside of BK or foreclosure? When was the last time we had customer contact, for example, and where is it from a loss mid perspective? Importantly, right, what have we done with title since the last time we did something, right? And what has happened with that property on title? So we've created, obviously, a process there in order to do a scrub of those files. in order to get them in the best shape possible to move forward where we don't have a loss mitigation path active. Now, this time at least, there are a significant volume of loans that are hand raised for loss mitigation, right? So that we can stack the review of those files and discover those files in reverse order, right? Play the ones that we have loss mitigation against and really do the ones that we either have difficulty getting customer contact or we know we have to go down a more definitive path on those loans and move those up to the top. So it's a systematic approach, and at least for the scrubbing part, we were able to leverage what we have done in the past, and I think that will alleviate some of the concerns around the volumes that we'll push through towards the end of this year and the beginning of next year. And obviously, with regard to the firms, right? Most firms have partnered with us, and I know you're one of them as well, that the checklist approach, knowing that we have crossed off each box before we actually move on to the next step, has something that's now ingrained in almost all of our processes, right? That gives us something to fall back on. And as Anthony mentioned, right, also something to document so that when somebody comes in later, we can show all of this, right, and say, we went through step by step. We implemented exactly what the safeguards and restrictions were. We overcame those for these loans. They did move forward, right? And we did everything we could and get customer engagement, but still move forward with that. And at the same time, get those files in good shape so that when we actually do refer them to you at the end of this year or the beginning of next year, you can move forward faster with less back and forth with our foreclosure coordinators in order to get those loans in the proper position.
And I agree with that, making sure that, you know, for the files that are not able to move in, especially for your FHA files, right? With that January 27th date, making sure that if you do have to move forward to foreclosure with those, that those are ready to go, right? As it relates to the title issues and so forth. Making sure that if there's any endorsement issues, those are fixed as well, or an AOM if your state requires an AOM prior to proceeding with first legal. Making sure you have all those housekeeping matters done, that way they're ready to go prior to January 27th. Alan?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about file scrubs, there are things you're doing as the last check before you refer to foreclosure. I also think it's kind of important to look back to the things we're most worried about finding when we're doing that. I mean, for me, I think back to that period in March and April of last year, particularly the end of March, where people were, servicers were they were doing their best to implement everything they could while sending all their people home, you know, while dealing with, you know, initially you only had legislation and then, you know, you have the GSEs and govies coming out with their own things. And we didn't have the digital platform stood up immediately when the calls started coming in. So dealing with that population is something we've been particularly focused on. You know, one measure we're taking is before we refer to foreclosure, you know, we're checking any, doing a search of the call notes, particularly focused on that time to say, hey, are there any keywords that, you know, the agent wrote down while they were talking? Do we have any delta between, you know, a keyword hit on COVID or pandemic or what have you, and the customer getting a forbearance to try to catch those? It is kind of needle in a haystack, but, you know, we think that is something missing there is the kind of thing that's going to have regulatory consequences. We're very, very concerned about. You know, other than that, we're largely doing a lot of the same stuff that John was just talking about.
Yep, and that's where the law firm and the servicer come hand in hand, right? The team effort, making sure that nothing goes out the door that's going to go out the door. Anthony?
Yeah, I have to echo the checklist, just like John and Alan were saying, right? I think this is our backbone, right? And it's really what's the proof of what we did and why we did it. I think when we're looking at look backs, we're using data as our first tool to see, okay, what are the things we know we can do a manual review on? What are the things we know we can't do a manual review on? So we try and split out that population first and foremost. And then that population is able to roll into, we built an automated referral database, essentially, that allows the checks and balances for the old checklist items. We all know about the stuff that occurred in the first one, right? I mean, we had 2, 3, some of us had 4 or 5 pages of checklists you had to go down by state, Massachusetts, New York, all that kind of stuff. So we took that existing items that we've learned in the past, and we leveraged our technology to say, does it meet this area? And if yes, move on to the next one. But with the new regulations, we also had to implement, 30 more checks. So doing those 30 more checks, give or take 5, we really, try to leverage that technology as well, just so what we're presenting to our teams is stuff that meets criteria 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then goes all the way down to the end, right? So that we're not, spinning our wheels, just looking at things that we're not going to refer on. We know, we've already had an SCRA hit, or we know we've had an active loss mitigation, right? So we're first really trying to utilize technology to break away all the things that we don't want. And then once we finally get to the endpoint and we've actually done our referral and we've done our screenshots of every single item. Yeah, we're not, we did the DoD search, we did the screenshot of that. It's not loss mitigation, we have a screenshot of the loss mitigation module. We have screenshots of our documents. It doesn't show any documents in the last 90 days from the customer for unresponsive. I mean, we're taking those steps, which has tripled our time to do a referral, right? But at the end point, is that less time or more time than if you have to do an audit response, right? So obviously we're always weighing those types of risk and rewards. But I know one thing that we definitely engaged, and I engaged quickly, was my internal audit, my internal lines of defense, or QC teams, people that aren't making the decisions within the business. I said, I want you to look at the items that I referred to make sure that I'm not missing anything, right? And we don't have learning opportunities. So we engage them on early to say, I want you to look at all my stuff. Sometimes operational people don't want people looking into your things, but I was like, you know what, let me know if I'm making a mistake early on, because I want to fix it right away. I want to make sure that what we've discussed on our calls, because we've all had multiple calls with our compliance teams, that we're doing what we said we were going to do. So I think that was one of the biggest, I'd say, changes that we've talked about that we've done. But I think we're all on the same page when it comes to, documentation, proof.
I agree, and that's what the Bureau said too in our comments to the final rule too. Make sure you have proof if you move. Make sure you keep it in your servicing file. Moving on to the next question: what and when did you anticipate before year end, Alan?
Well, I mean, we already touched on the the resumption of evictions. That's something that should go forward. I know, obviously moving on the loans where we can get comfortable with the safeguard, or ones where we can't, doing as much prep work as possible to get them ready for the post-moratorium surge in filings that we're anticipating. And, I mean, we've had a fair amount of internal back and forth over when is the right time, because I mean, there's fee reclassification issues. Like, if you refer a file to First Legal, you would incur an expense for that. Yet there's a curing event before that, and somehow you don't go forward. Well, that's incurred during a moratorium, and that's just not something we want to have to deal with. So we have that before the end of the year. As I said before, I'm really hoping for nothing. Nothing would be like the best news I've had in months. But like you said, Marissa, we are having to take it one day at a time until then. And I don't know if there's really more political will for further extensions. I know there is in some corners, but I think there's reason to believe that, the economy hasn't been, as beaten down as badly by the Delta variant as some people might have thought it would so far. So I'm cautiously optimistic, though. Of course, we'll have to wait and see.
And I do think that one report showed that the delinquency rate right now is about to pre-pandemic levels, along with the unemployment levels as well. So it is interesting. Anthony?
Yeah, and I know we touched on this a little bit earlier, but one of the hurdles we have is the changes in programs for loss mitigation, and we have FHA changes, we have USDA, we have VA that are scheduled and need to be implemented by October 21st, right? So we're working through that right now, making sure that we're updating our waterfalls, we're updating our technology for those items, we're doing training, we're doing testing. So those are items I know that we're definitely working on right now to make sure are in place. As John said earlier, hey, kudos to the governments for doing these things and making these changes because it has helped out. We haven't had to, jump through all the hoops for all the documentation to be sent, all of those things. So I think that's really helped, and that's streamlined our process too. If every single one of these customers had to send in full packages, I mean, just imagine where we'd be. I mean, that would be a whole different process and ball game for sure. So I hope that we can get through this. I hope we don't see any more loss mitigation changes, because then we can, kind of let that rest and get our customers not only on the phones, customer team members not only on the phones, but our loss mitigators, right, in a steady state of knowing exactly what the waterfall is and be comfortable with those types of things and let the processes prove themselves. So I'm hoping we don't see anything else. I'm hoping before year end, we don't see an extension of that January date, because I can definitely see that, right? Which then obviously means, what's more gray area that we got to plan for that we are not knowing about today. And we talked about that before, right? Just kind of planning for the unknown. I think we're always kind of heads up. Every time you see something pop up in your email, you're like, okay, what now? What are we looking at now? So I anticipate just the loss mitigation stuff. I anticipate us knowing what's going to happen for the January date, and I'm hoping that's it.
John?
Yeah, I think Anthony raised a good point, right? If we're looking at a gold standard of release and announcement, right, we can look at the VA and what they've done. When the VA first announced their partial claim and their foray into different workout types than their, I would say, ancient guidebook, handbook stuff that they had before, there was a lot of head scratching. What were they doing? What were they going to do? But they took that period of time between the initial announcement and their announcement this week and did a fantastic job with regard to a release to know exactly what their program is, exactly how they want it implemented, exactly the dates associated with what they want to have implemented, documentation, templates for the partial claim note and the other security instrument, right? All those things were released to help the service. Right? It was probably one of the best releases of information that I've seen come out of the agency side of the business in a long time, and they should be proud of that, and we should applaud them for that. I think that will make it much easier for us that have VA loan populations in order to push that out to the veteran customers and make sure that we're addressing that. They made it very easy, I think, from an implementation perspective and a way for us to operationalize that versus some of the other earlier announcements, right, where we were operationalizing for weeks 2, 3, and 4. And before we got to week 5, they changed it and we had to go back to square one and start operationalizing again, right? So to both Alan and Anthony's point, hopefully we're done with that. Unfortunately, Alan has the glass half full. I have kind of the glass half empty, pessimistic optimism. I think we're entering into the seasonality portion of our industry in which all things also hit at one time. I am sure we'll see the GSE announcement around we don't evict during holiday periods, right? So even though the eviction moratorium will end for parts of the population, it's going to be instituted again, I think, for others. I think we'll see a lot of political interest in the stories around customers who are not getting a workout or are still struggling getting back on their feet because of COVID or the financial impacts resulting from COVID. And I think there will be political action taken. So I don't think necessarily that we've seen the end of direct assistance to certain numbers of citizens who need help. And what we might see is maybe more focused assistance for them from a standpoint of delaying the loss of their home or the process of losing their home, and a lot of attention around servicers, both in the media and in political discussions around what we're doing to address every customer's needs. And again, it won't be an excuse for us, right? That standard 8 to 18% of people who don't engage with us, we don't know how to get them engaged, right? That's not going to be an excuse. We're going to have to find a way to do that. And we're going to have to find a way to, Anthony's point, prove up that we've been doing that all along. And I think it's going to become more difficult now off the last quarter, just because of the normal seasonality things around the holiday period and how, the U.S. in particular, right, implements the holiday period around a time that we don't want people to be suffering, right? And we certainly don't want them to be losing their homes. So I think that will overlay it as well, and that we will still probably be dealing with a lot of the questions we've been asking today in January and February of next year.
So, and valid points. And John, every morning, I start my morning, I have my favorite links in the background when I log in. And one of the first links is the White House, right? I read the briefing room every morning because I've learned that most of the announcements as it relates to the housing industry come out around 7 or 8 a.m. Eastern. So that's my first place. I'm like, okay, is there any new news today? And so I have a feeling that I'm going to continue to be doing this for a very long time in the near future, just checking to see what announcements are coming out from the administration. Because if you look at the last extension, the agencies did it after the request of the administration as it relates to the evictions too. And so that's why I'm very curious tracking the administration, seeing what the briefing room is saying and so forth. And you did mention the VA, and I want to say the VA did a tremendous job because they even came out when they rolled out the partial claim and they said, we're going to follow what we know works. We received all your feedback. You're right, it does work. So we're going to follow the FHA partial claim, or we're going to do this. And I think that they did a tremendous job with releasing this sample note and mortgage along with templates for bulk uploads and so forth, telling you where to send the documents and so forth. And so we're going to end today's conversation with one of my favorite topics that some of you may know, FHA. We're going to end it with the FHA ALM. It was the first of its kind, the rollout of it, and did you see a lot of response? And so Anthony, I'm going to ask you first.
Yeah, the FHA ALM, when we read into the terms and what to present, it was actually pretty easy overall, right? It was pretty straightforward, so that was nice. And then we kept reading on and it started talking about you got to send these things out proactively within a certain amount of time. And I think that was going to be one of the biggest rubs in doing this entire program. But luckily for us, FHA later came out and said, hey, we're going to go ahead and, not make you guys do that overall. So that was very nice. So definitely appreciate that. And then getting it to the top of the waterfall, right? So any customer who comes in is going to be reviewed for the FHA ALM. And it made it a lot easier, but I think one of the tough things about it was just getting the customers to understand how it's going to work. And I say that because we have a series of questions that we talk to the customers about, right? It's like, can you afford your current payment? If yes, you're going to move down a partial claim perspective, right? If you can't, then you go through a mod. But at the very top of the waterfall, regardless of what you answer, you're going to be reviewed for this ALM product. So I think coming out with the talk-off points for our customer-facing teams was interesting. It was kind of a challenge to be able to say, okay, I'm going to ask you these series of questions, but regardless of what you tell me, you may get there, but you're still going to be reviewed for this ALM, which is looking for a payment reduction overall. And this is why. And then so you may get these types of documents, or you may get some of the other documents. From a customer response, due to the fact that the terms primarily are term extension and interest rate reduction, we're not seeing a lot of customers hit that payment reduction overall. And with our portfolio specifically, it's not very mature. I think if you have a bigger, mature portfolio where you only have 250 term left, and if you're going to extend it to 360, maybe you're going to be able to hit that 25 payment reduction. But with a lot of our items, they're a lot newer origination, so you already have pretty low interest rates, and you already have maybe 350 left on your term overall. So if you're only going to extend it out 10 more years and you're only going to be reducing it by a couple of basis points on the interest rate, you're not going to hit that payment reduction. So we haven't seen the response I think people wanted to see. However, with the new programs that are coming out for FHA, right? I think they did this in response to that, because I think they were really thinking that this was going to hit that payment reduction. The other programs that are going to be down in the waterfall that hit, that are still targeting payment reduction, with the way they're doing it, we're definitely going to still meet the end goal of I think what FHA was trying to get at.
John?
Yeah, I certainly agree with Anthony's comments, right? The interesting thing I think was the fact that there was some pressure on HUD to introduce some type of streamline option, and that's what results in the ALM, right? They obviously put some thought process around it, as Anthony mentioned, right? Getting to that payment reduction was a great idea and a way for the services to implement that, right? We could operationalize that. We've done that before, so that was good. The demographics were bad, right? In that, oh, the overwhelming majority of FHA customers who went delinquent as of March of 2020 and after, right, were only 5 years into their mortgage, right? So they as Anthony pointed out, were not the key strike zone for this product, right? But in response to that, as Anthony said, I went back and looked at what the waterfall looked like and said, okay, we can simplify this even more, right? We can take out all this owner occupant and other stuff that we didn't really need, right? We need a way to get to that payment reduction. And the best way to do that is two simple ways, right? Let's do the recovery mod, which was an excellent product that they put out for us to use. And then they left us with the to do the full type of HAMP combo plan in which we can reach almost every customer, right? Can get some type of combo relief that gets them to an affordable payment. If they can't get to an affordable payment there, they really shouldn't have bought the house to begin with, right? So that I think at least now we have the tools in the right place. The ALM will have, I think, overall, when we look back at it, very little, maybe 2 to 3% of customers will fall into that. Maybe HUD will go back and look at that and say, okay, what better streamlined product can we have for next time? Because obviously there will be a next time, right? But at least they opened the door to that concept for the first time. And, as an FHA service, I was very appreciative of the effort.
Perfect, great feedback. Thank you, John. Before we conclude today's session, do any of you have anything else you want to add? No? Okay, well, thank you to my co-panelists for joining me today and sharing their insights on this critical post-pandemic servicing topic. My name is Marissa Yaker, and this concludes the session of Pan Different, the Paget Web Summit.